This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates in central Iowa companies.
Amplified.
Peace, y'all. It's your boy 360 back again, here to discuss personal growth, personal evolution, black masculinity, whatever that means to you, insofar as what it means to me. And what else do I talk about? A little bit of everything. I got myself in the chair today. I haven't been in the chair in a long time. I haven't been in the studio in a long time. So I set myself up. I don't have an outline for today, but I have plenty of things to talk about, like anybody with a podcast does. So let's start with a quote from Robin D.G. Kelley. A paraphrase, I should say. Robin D.G. Kelley, in a talk about 9 years ago with a theorist, poet, and philosopher, Fred Moten. Some of it Mayo. Let me see if I can find it. And I'm going to paraphrase Robin D.G. Kelley. He's the author of Freedom Dreams and several other texts. But he says that effectively that the first act of African rebellion is maroonage. And maroonage is just a fancy way of saying maroonage, which is a fancy way of saying fugitive, sort of a derivation. It's derived from, I think it's a Spanish word, cimarron, which is like a fugitive, like a runaway horse or something like that. So I like to start there. I say that quote frequently when I think about political, social development, growth, responses to, oppression, conflict. And so I say that, I bring up that quote because it's a quote that I offered up to a few folks in a chat, a work Slack. So I'm going to start with black women. This is a podcast on black masculinity and some other stuff. But I'm going to start with black women. So a coworker of mine shared an article in the New York Times titled "Delusion by the Election. Some Black Women Are Deciding to Rest." And another person responded, "I love this." I'm going to delete the name. I'm going to quote the Slack, but delete the names to protect the innocent. "I love this, blank. Thanks for sharing. It's frustrating how short and high level it is," meaning the article. "There's so much more to her saying, quote, 'We're opting out. We're going to mind our business. We are resting and recovering from trying to do it their way.'" The "theirs" emphasis is on the poster. And my response was the quote that I offered up at the very beginning, that Robin D.G. Kelley said something to the effect of the first act of African rebellion, and this is against capture in the transatlantic Ma'afa, was maroonage, fugitivity, running away. And it's a common theme in the history of African rebellion in the whole Ma'afa. And when I say Ma'afa, I mean it's a Kiswahili word that just says like the great tragedy, the great disaster. And throughout that history of this great disaster, maroonage, escaping, maroonage, has been the first act of rebellion. It's not to plea with your captor, not to petition your captor or your oppressor, or what have you, for freedom, not to bring awareness to your pain, but to simply run away. Choose fugitivity. And even that the word fugitivity is loaded, because fugitivity implies that there's some sort of like state or somebody with authority who can hold you in blame for something. So to be a fugitive means you're running from the law. And then to have law means that you have authority to create the rules. And so even in that of itself, I would take issue with the term fugitivity, even though that's what I brought up. Because it kind of centers the oppressor and their law to keep you captured and to torture you and whatnot. So anyway, as I often do, that is a digression. Let's define maroonage as like the act of escaping slavery to form independent communities. It can also refer to actions enslaved people took to practice freedom. And so when I think about Black women's response to this latest election cycle for the national election cycle involving the presidential election, I think about the power of maroonage, the power of running away. And I think that's at the root of what this rest thing is. It isn't just rest for the sake of like not toiling. It's an escape from the capture. And when you can use capture poetically, you can use capture in the way that like the capture of electorally Black people's attention, our votes, in a way where we don't see the fruits of that capture. So I think capture is a fair word in this instance, if I do say so myself. There's a capture that happens to the hearts and minds of the Black electorate, and I've seen it as a Black person, just as on the lead up to this particular election, that there was a capture of our enthusiasm and our loyalty to leverage it toward the symbology of like saving this democracy, to the extent that this has ever been a democracy. And again, when we're talking about terms, words mean things, but in English, they mean a whole lot of things. If anybody, a friend of mine and I talk about this, and we referenced Dr. Jacob Carruthers when we talk about English. If anybody understands what you're talking about when you finish a conversation with them in English, then you're probably using English incorrectly. And that's sort of a tangential reference to Dr. Jacob Carruthers, who in the 70s wrote Science and Oppression, sort of broke down the language and like the use of science, the use of science or sciencey terms to bind people, particularly to oppress, to force people into exploitative systems. So yeah, that's English for you. Fugitivity, shaky word. Democracy, shaky word. If you have a nation and you have a people, if I may digress on that, like democracy, if you have a people, for about 400 to 200 years, as long as this nation is, it's like we got 200 and some and counting. I'm not going to do the math right now in my head. It's like, okay, when has democracy been a thing? Like if you're born here, or if you toil here, you spill blood here, you work here, from the perspective of Africans, but this is certainly not just a particular thing. You can say this for anyone that came here, either against their will or who was compelled to come here, given the circumstances of the place where they were born, or the pull, or the pull of this nation from the place where they were born, or the bespoiling of the nation or the place where the people left. But that said, for whatever reason a person comes here, their labor, their blood, their sweat, their everything, their essence goes into making this thing what it is, materially, spiritually, physically, emotionally, socially, you would think you would deserve something by way of citizenship, and citizenship in the sense of like giving you a benefit from the state for what you get, what you contribute to it. And if you contribute all of those things, and yet you're not allowed to participate fully in your own governance, in selecting the representatives in your own governance, then how is that a democracy? So anyway, that's just, I want to make sure when I'm using these words that I'm using them tongue firmly in cheek and that we're on the same page. That if anything, if you get anything from all this, if like it just all went in one ear and out the other, just remember that words, you control their meaning, and we should constantly interrogate that. But anyway, back to the subject at hand. Escaping, getting away, maroonage. I wasn't sure I was going to speak about getting away, maroonage today, but it's one of those things that's always on my mind. I have several mantras, like intellectual mantras, and the word maroonage, I've really stuck on that for quite some time. It's a common thing for me to just find a concept or a word and really burn it in there, really kind of focus on it, fixate on it for a while, and it becomes part of my dictionary, becomes part of like my worldview, my social imaginary, so to speak. And like a social imaginary is just a term for sort of everything, your worldview. It's just a fancy word, but it's one of those things like once I found it, I was like, oh yeah, that's the best way to describe it. Social imaginary is just like how you interact with like your lived reality and what you think reality is, which everybody's social imaginary is going to look different to them in a first person sense. But then there's also sort of a collective sense of what we agree about when we're in the social imaginary. So it's something that collective, we can all imagine this thing together. And on that note, you can imagine your social imaginary can include maroonage. It can include something that you agree to together, like we escape together. And that was common in the history of escape. Now, there are like say on like PBS.org, I saw that there are documented probably 300 and some rebellions of some sort, and that's just in the United States. We're talking about in what we would think of as in North America, right around in the United States, over the course of before incorporation as a nation and since. So we're talking about, well over 300 rebellions of some sort, and that's not including the acts of running away. And so if we're not even tracking the number of Africans who ran away, then you're thinking about a situation where we're not even counting. It doesn't even make sense to enumerate the number of rebellions when you think about it just being, think of it this way. This is a persistent way of being. It's to be caught and to run away. To be caught, to be run away. Some people run away and come back. There's a term called petit maroonage, which is running away and then getting caught and then you come back for whatever reason. And there's many reasons why people come back. Some people come back because, again, they're caught. And some people come back because they may not, it's too dangerous out free, in the wilderness. And so that's petit maroonage. But also, there's a petit maroonage of the mind, which is what is happening with, you could say it's happening to black people, but that article, black women were like, we're tired of putting on the superwoman cape and we're tired of saving democracy. Both of those things can be put in scare quotes, saving democracy. But so in this sense, with black women, there's a petit maroonage, there's a small maroonage, which is like the maroonage of the mind or the maroonage of your presence. So it's not like you ran away. These people went to, you name the place, from Belize to back to, went to Ghana or Senegal or Gambia or anywhere else. it's just a retreat into a social retreat, an emotional retreat. And so I guess I'll put a pin here and just I would challenge anybody listening or watching to think about ways to engage in petite maroonage. That stealing away of steal away home, like steal away in the night, like move in silence away from the systems and objects of your exploitation of harm, whatever it is for you. Think about ways of marooning your mind first and foremost, like escaping your mind, which you could call that like decolonization is a maroonage of the mind. Until you fully decolonized your mind, you're just trying to get away. You don't know what the plan is. But you just know where you are is horror, is hell. So you've got to get away from that as soon as possible. And what that speaks to, that getting away speaks to the human experience. One of my favorite teachers, Baba Dr. Greg Carr, talks about momentum of memory, talks about movement in memory. And he discusses human life, human history, the story of people being movement more than anything else. Like we don't have a story to tell if we don't move. And so I offer that up because there's a lot of talking points. There are a lot of wounded or potentially wounded people on the other side of this election. There are people who are the target of really inflammatory rhetoric. Immigrants as just this broad swath of just nameless and faceless people who are storming at the gates to, take down this democracy. That's how that's how it's been characterized. How not only the president-elect, but just anybody with that mindset, anybody that is amenable to his mindset, has characterized, the other, the immigrant as the other, as a threat. And so I'm saying that to say that, like, don't get ticklish about me talking about Africans and talking about black people, because it applies to all of us. Movement is a human concept. Going from one place to another is something not only, I would say, not something that is just a matter of fact, but it is an imperative. If it ain't good where you are, if it's hell where you are, it is your divine right as a human being who has locomotion, or somebody that can put you in a wheelbarrow and push you somewhere, to get the hell out of the hell. And so anybody, I guess I'm going to extend that logic, anybody who wants to circumscribe or prevent your ability to move in good faith is operating in bad faith. Anybody that wants to keep you from moving, keep you from escaping whatever your personal trouble is, your harm, your hell, then really they're going against human nature. And that starts to bring up some real questions about humanity. And I think I mentioned that before. If I haven't, it's something that I wrestle with a lot. Like, what does it mean to be human? Is it what humans have always done, what we've done for like 200,000 years or so? Is it, to a degree, maybe, yeah. I mean, is it like who we are to each other? And I prefer that. I really do prefer that question. Is it who we are to each other? And again, I would refer back to Dr. Carr and like some of the Africana studies framework that he uses. And he talks about the governance structure. Talks about this question that arises from the governance structure. What do Africans mean to each other? And so that governance structure, yes, in this case, I'm talking about Africans, but apply it however you see fit. This is, say, your family or whatever your us is or your we is, however you decide to take care of one another, what you mean to one another, and what those answers sound like, that is your governance structure. And so that's what I'm most concerned about with regard to humanity. How often are we asking them the question, what do we mean to each other? And the answer that you get will tell you how human that person is. Because if nothing else, I know this. I know that human beings are a social species. I know that we need one another. And so anything that separates humans from one another, from the collaborative act of helping make sure that nature doesn't kill us, I think to me that's human. Like if you're willing, that's part of our deal. You can't raise a baby without relationships. An infant will die without human contact. A human infant will die without human contact. Everything we do is relational. There's a Harvard study about relations, not specifically about relations, but this is the takeaway. They interviewed tons of people who had, in the Boston area, I believe, and at different stages in their life, just to gauge like their happiness. I think it might be labeled the Happiness Project. And I like citing this study frequently because it's a human interest study. It's from the mouths of the humans interviewed. So they are checked in at various times, some longitudinal, one of the biggest and most thorough longitudinal studies that's ever been conducted on human happiness, human disposition. And by and large, no matter what the sort of the status of the people, either starting, high happiness, low, whatever, they, at the end of their lives, the thing that they preference more than anything else is their relationships. They say, yeah, I've had this in my life, I've had this in my career, I've had this accomplishment, I've had all these things, but the most important thing to me is something like, is my partner, am I in good, right relationship with, my partner, my closest partner, or my family? Do my kids like me? Do my adult kids love me? Relationships. Who am I to my community? I've talked about identity in previous podcasts and like what it means to be a person. And I got to come back to that it isn't just what you say. It isn't just what your ego tells you are as your identity. Your identity isn't fully realized. You're never fully a full person just by you, the things that you describe about yourself. You are the composite of like all of the people that love you, all of the people that think something of you that are on the outside. You think it's just you just walking around as this atomic individual, but it's not. It's not. You are not the full you. You will never realize as a first person in your ego the fullness of yourself. Because you don't have the full story. You don't see the way that people look at you. And that's the way of knowing of connectedness is an old thing. To me, it's a genetic memory that I have that predates any of the stuff that I'm talking about. Any of the name for the continent of Africa predates the United States of America. It's a knowledge that is older than all of that stuff. It's older than the invention of the ego and, these Platonic ideals, these Greek philosophical ideas about like being yourself, or Descartes saying like, I think, therefore I am, where in opposition to that, in a book like Yurugu, which my partner Ray's are reading right now, that's not the point. Like, you aren't a thing because of your thinking. That's beside the point. You're a thing because of people. That's what Ubuntu is about. The philosophy, the Bantu people philosophy of Ubuntu is a person is a person because of people. So I am not me by myself just because I declared it so. I am me because I am part of a genealogical lineage. I'm part of a collaboration. I'm part of a community. I'm part of all that. I'm part of Amplified. I'm part of all of these things. And that's the fullness of who I am, which I'll never comprehend because I don't know. I have no idea. I have a clue. I mean, I'm sitting here with Aki and Laura, and I have a clue what they think about me, but that's not I don't know the full story. And I won't know fully who I am without, but I know I'm not fully who I am without that. We're not fully who we are without all of that. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that other than that it's just something to think about, which is pretty much every other thing that I go on a digression for. Is it helpful? I don't know, take it or leave it. I hope so. I think I'm enriching. I think I'm enriching my own experience and hopefully your experience, but like, who am I? I'm not that important. I just talked about the ego a second ago, so my ego's not important. My relationships are, though. And back to relationships, back to black women, that's what I was talking about at the top. Black women in maroonage. And separations. I am still chomping at the bit of the divisions of gender and other sort of compartments, other ways of sorting humans into these easily bite-sized chunks. And I'm struggling with that. I'm struggling with these tensions. It's really the gender stuff, especially for a pod. I guess I should be talking about this. I was going to be like, I don't know. But if this is a podcast about masculinity, about black masculinity and whatever that means, then I have to address what it is. What creates the separate? What creates this the feminine and the masculine? What creates the separation between black men and black women? And it seems arbitrary. It seems like it was created. No, it seems like it is. You can study it. I referenced Tommy Curry before, and he talks about the creation in the 1800s, the 1800s, the creation of things like gender. And this taxonomy, this hierarchy created by a class really of oppressors. And I don't mean that in some way I'm a victim of oppressors. No, people that was sought to subjugate and organize humanity in hierarchy. This follows this and then under that. And so in the late 1800s, that happens with gender too. And so there are these people, philosophers, or they fancy themselves scholars and whatnot, and they create the terms for what makes something masculine. They say, and it obviously fluctuates, but they say things like this: that the white men are the top, so they're the most masculine, and then so there's the dichotomy that's created, and so white women are feminine. But that's the top. And so there are other groups of people who their whole race is feminine. And so they start here and say there is such a thing as masculine and feminine. And they seek to feminize, masculine is the top. It is the power and the conquest and the ego. The first person, the protagonist, and to feminize the other gender or genre of human being is to make them the receptacle, the passive, the the subjugated or whatever. But again, this is inside whiteness being the top. So I'm trying to make a visual of this. And so you start there, and then you say, okay, so masculine, feminine inside whiteness. So bloop, bloop, but whiteness is here, but whiteness, the whole thing is masculine. So then you get into a tricky space. So then other races, these categories of human beings in different geographic locations with different cultures, they're feminine. And they start making up stuff about that. Like, oh, well, because they say, oh, because of this person in this part of the, on the eastern part of Eurasia. And they're like, those people are feminine because they don't have beards like we have beards in the western part of Eurasia, the northwestern part of Eurasia. So that means that they're feminine. Or they have this particular practice. Or they wear, they wear garments, or they do this and they do that. They have these customs, and then they automatically make them feminine. So they feminize whole categories of people so that they can be oppressed. And so they create this false, even the notion, they create this false tension, this antagonism. And that goes back to what I said about English. And there's some people think the English, just because of the way that it came together, and there's no way to tell how a language came together, but a bunch of Germanic tribes and a few, some Anglo-Saxons and here and there, and they bump up against the Greeks and the Romans. But ultimately, this is a language that's formed through conflict. And so there are certain antagonisms that sort of spring up out of that way of thinking, out of that way of creating language. And so you've got these hierarchies. I'm just saying all that to say that there's some hierarchies baked into how gender is created. And so that spills down into sort of the minds and indoctrinates people like enslaved Africans. And so they're kind of hung up on gender now because we have our own ways of knowing, old ways of knowing that we really never gave up, even though you try to brutalize them out of people. Certain things are just genetic. You just have memories that, no amount of depraved lunacy can squeeze out of you. Some things are just older than that. So try as they might, we still bend English into our own making. We bend culture. We bend all these things, and everyone has a right to do that. But yeah, back to the point. Gender, separations. We've indoctrinated with that. So we're seeing things like there. We're seeing ghosts. The ghosts of gender. And we're seeing this declaration, this is the truth. It just is. And it's funny how often we just accept something as the truth just because somebody said so. Or we accept something as just the way that it is, as opposed to a kind of way, an iteration of many, a permutation, a change, a flip of many opportunities to do a thing. Let's get focused on gender, because my mind goes 1,000 different places. This is what happens when you don't have a script. We're in a gender hangover. We have ghosts. We're haunted by this gender construct invented in the 1800s by a couple of dudes that it just so happens it was worth it for them to put themselves at the top of the hierarchy and put their their genre of human beings at the top of the hierarchy and then place everybody else under it. How convenient. How convenient. It's like me just creating, taking my personal tastes and dynamic shoe size everything and then creating a game about how to fit in based on my taste, on how I everything from how I draw, from how I think about the world, and saying, anybody that doesn't think that way is inferior. It sounds silly when I do that, but, you get enough people to do it and it turns into a nihilistic death cult. But again, I digress. Genre, gender, separations. how did we get to black women and black men fighting all the time? So there's this thing about othering. Like when you create a difference, I think you create a conflict. Not necessarily every time, but when you create these differences and then you inject meaning into these differences, which really are inconsequential. If an alien were to look at in the human species, just small tweaks that make a person, one thing or the other. And the biology doesn't even dictate that there's just like one particular way of being. It gets fuzzy in certain areas. You have a certain distribution of the population that's certainly male, certain distribution of the population that's female, and you can put those in quotes. And it's based on a bunch of different biological markers, genetic and like chromosomes, sex organs, and all that stuff. But ultimately, you understand that those are humans across the board. And so if you create that cleave between these two things, then you've already created something. But that doesn't necessarily make creating difference doesn't necessarily make two people fight, make two kinds of people or what have you fight. It's when you start injecting meaning, when you start saying this is this and this other thing has these other things that are deterministic, that determine how this person moves through the world and could determine their future, then you've created a rift. And I don't know how I need to go into the rift. There's a lot of ways to talk about it. But I think I'm more excited to talk about healing the rift than to digging in the scar. And I think the way to heal is to find ways. It just seems corny, but find ways to unify. There's a oneness. Before I came in here, and this is pertinent, this isn't even really, this is not a digression. I was listening to something from the Progressive Love Academy about certain languages in the Dogon of West Africa who do not historically and culturally have the same hang-ups in their language about the other as English does, like this and that, these dichotomies and these adversarial relationships that you create just in the nature of how the language is used. And so the Dogon did not have to that extent that way of othering. So there's a unity in the language itself. There's a removal of ego in the language itself. So there's an understanding that we are a we, and that's important. And I think that that was my plea, if I had to make a plea for disillusioned black women thinking we're all on our own. Just remember who you belong to. Beyond yourself. And I know that seems like to say that, oh, well, you belong to these other people. It seems like, oh, here we go again. You want me to make time for all these people. I just need something for myself. And I need this quiet time. Can you just give me that? But I would argue that it's not the solitude that you need. It's the character of the relationship that needs to change. It isn't that you don't need to be in relationship with people anymore. It's just that you're in the relationship with people that are taking from you. And I get it. Takers, my mom always says something to the effect of takers will always find givers. But that doesn't mean that you should stop giving. You just need to find the right receivers. I want us to run away together. And by us, since this is a podcast about black masculinity, I want black people to run away together. Whatever that means. If it just means reclaiming space where reclaiming and affirming and supporting space where you can ask the question, what do we mean to one another? Without any gaze, without any infecting perspectives, what do we mean to each other? And keep asking that question. And over, with this, like this saying in mind from this scholar by the name of Mariba Kelsey. Yeah. Dr. Carr talks about Mariba Kelsey all the time and says, let us agree to agree. And so, like, I get it. I get people are tired. I get it that Black women are tired. And they're tired of, putting on the cape. And I know that's tough to think that you have to save everybody. But I would contend that the bigger damage was whoever told you that you had to save everybody, or that you even could save everybody. That is the more injurious, that is the scam. To convince you, either through media or retelling of history, that Black woman, if you just bleed a little bit more, if you just show up a little bit more, if you sweat, if you just weather a few more blows, everybody will be saved. That's the biggest lie. That somebody convinced you that that was possible. So yeah, maroonage and rest and escape. I don't know how much time we have for rest. But I do know that there's a rejuvenating quality to being in community, being in a governance structure, asking yourself, what do we mean to each other? So yeah, I don't know if that thought's complete. I talked about a lot of things, but I do not know if that thought's complete. And what is it to have a complete thought? But I do know, yeah, let's run away. Let's run away into the woods together. That, if I had to say, yeah. No fugitives. We're not fugitives because we don't believe in their authority over us. We're not concerned about democracy, saving it, or whether it exists to a degree that's reliable. We're not concerned about genres, or at least I'm not, but about these different genres and the difference in like what it means to be this or this. We're concerned about agreements. So yeah, let us agree to agree and run away together, Black people. Yeah, that's it. Peace, y'all. This has been Brothers Gonna Work It Out.